a safe holiday. Get your birds squared away. You figure out what was happening?
Get what?
The birds? Was it a tractor trailer that hit the birds?
Tappahannock.
Oh, in Tappahannock.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't think they figured out what killed them all
They
yet.
haven't figured it out.
Still,
I figured Alex, he's looking bewildered. I figured he'd be all over top of that.
I don't remember that issue coming up in Fort Royal.
Yeah, it was a little further down, yeah.
So the truck killed the birds.
they don't know there was a truck. That's a theory.
Oh, there were just dead birds. And
Yeah,
no
it was,
truck.
it was dead birds all over the bridge.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that could be
Maybe
possibly a transportation issue, so. Okay,
All at once.
again, welcome everyone. We'll go around the room and introduce, we'll start with Mr. Voigt back there, IT guy.
Becky Golden, representing the Western District.
Alex Long, Mayor Town of Fort Royal, representing the eastern part of Fort Royal District.
Jimmy Street, representing the western part of Port Royal District.
David Beal, Bowling Green District.
Ian Hollis not representing any district, but I guess I'm the Bambo GWRC guy.
Steve Rollins, I'm representing the Planning Commission, Mattapan District.
JD Young, representing the Reedy Church District.
I am not Leon Hughes. I'm Brad Robinson with the Planning Department, and I'm sitting in this evening for Leon, who has been ill this week.
I'm Lisa Beck, also the planning department.
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, we're not going to belabor everyone at this evening. Ian, thank you so very much for being here with us this afternoon, and we're going to turn it over to you, sir.
Can I put this on? Okay, never mind, I'll do it like that. I used to represent a district. I used to be the member of parliament for a district in Johannesburg in South Africa called Sandton and Alexandria. We have in Alexandria the very poor neighborhood, and Sandton is the super rich neighborhood, and I had both of them in my district. So in fact, they used my district as a teaching aid when I was at MIT. I wasn't expecting it. They were showing slides of places in the world, and they said, "Can you guess where this is?" And it was like Bangalore, India, and the next thing there was my district on the screen. And my first 2 weeks at MIT, my resignation letter hadn't yet been accepted, so I was technically still a member of parliament. And there they were showing my district on the screen, and I was like, I know where that is. It's regarded as potentially the place in the world with the largest Gini coefficient. So I had the poorest people in the country and the richest people in the country, both in my district, and that was an interesting plan. Anyway, not here to talk to you about that. Thank you for having me. Tonight, we're just talking about funding of transportation projects here in Virginia, a lot more closer to home. And Leon asked me just to share this. So funding transportation projects is a multi-year endeavor. And one of the main points I want to just talk about tonight is that it's a cycle and it never stops. It's not a case of, hey, we got this project, we need to get it funded. It's a case of there is a constant process going on to fund transportation projects, but you have to enter the process at the right time if you want success. So it relies on months and often years of work. Most funding applications require a prior transportation planning study. When you submit an application to this thing called SmartScale, they ask you, do you have a study that supports this? What do you have that tells us that this project is going to actually fix the problem? So you have to show that some work has been done. And then the application itself usually requires some engineering work and a detailed cost estimate. If you can't tell them how much the thing is going to cost, they won't accept your application. And usually there's a little bit of engineering work that has to get done, usually some drawings to show what it is that you're constructing. Occasionally, especially with federal government departments, they're looking for a shovel-ready project, particularly when there's an economic crisis and they need a stimulus package to get everything going again. And if you don't have any sort of shovel-ready projects in your back pocket, you're going to miss out on the really big funding that gets produced at some periods in the economic cycle. After 5 years, planning studies, cost estimates, and environmental approvals are regarded as a bit out of date. And portions of those studies or cost estimates, definitely cost estimates and environmental approvals, will have to be updated or even redone. So at the moment, the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment in Virginia will accept older studies if you update certain aspects of it. But that means some work, right? You've got to go and update the cost estimate, definitely. You've got to update a few other things. And the way things are going now, you have to update cost estimates almost on a weekly basis because the inflation over the last 5 years has been outrageous. And so I get real worn down by starting with a project, getting it funded, and then getting told, actually, no, the funding you've got is only about 50% of the value of the project. I'm sure VDOT's in the same boat where you got a funded project and suddenly the price has doubled when you try and do the construction. So we've been living in some unusual times. Where does the funding come from? So there's federal, state, and local funding. Federal funding, usually the federal funding is produced by an act of Congress, which is usually the Surface Transportation Act. I'm going to ask if we can circulate these slides afterwards, so you don't have to write down every single thing that's on the slide, because you'll get a copy of the slides, but feel free to write your notes about anything. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the IIJA, is the last version of the Surface Transportation Act that was authorized under the Biden administration, but it runs dead in September the 30th. It's finished. Congress is working on a new surface transportation reauthorization bill to replace it. And one congressman that delivered a presentation that I was at in DC said that they're aiming to get it approved in August, which is interesting because November's the midterm elections. So they're going to approve this colossal, I don't know how many billion transportation reauthorization bill some months before the election, which always makes everybody nervous. But it will reauthorize all forms of transportation funding, including the funding that pays our salaries at FAMPA, all the way to building massive bridges, tunnels, airport funding, everything in the country. It all gets put in this one big bill. And what took me a while to grasp when I first started working in the US is that that doesn't actually authorize anybody to spend the money. It's real unusual if you don't know the system. There is still an annual appropriations bill in Congress that takes 1 year of funding and it appropriates money that's designated in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. So those bills, the big one, lasts for usually about 5 years. But within that 5-year period, each annual year, they have to authorize the money just for that year in an appropriations bill, which says, okay, we got enough tax money and you can actually spend X amount this in the next 12 months. And in that, they wrap all of the grants and other pieces of funding that are in the reauthorization bill. And the reason for that is you don't know 5 years ahead of time how much tax is going to come in. You can guess, but you don't have an actual number. So you get a much better idea on an annual basis. And so they only actually appropriate the money to be spent once they've got an idea of the tax receipts. That includes infrastructure funding that is formula funding. Some of the funding is divided by population. So Virginia gets the amount of funding proportional to its population relative to the population in the rest of the country. So if we have 9% of the population, we get 9% of the money, sort of thing. That includes funding for the interstate, preventive maintenance, and then those three terms I'll explain later, CMAQ, SDGB, and CR. That's congestion mitigation and air quality funding, surface transportation block grant funding, and carbon reduction funding. There's about every 5 years, Congress appropriates some money for a thing called highway improvement. Yep, what is that funding? Highway improvement program, I think. And we never know when that funding is going to be appropriated. Somebody in Congress decides, well, let's give them some money for highways this year. Doesn't happen every year. It happens sort of every so often. Currently, in rural counties, you don't really get access to CMAQ, SDGB, and carbon reduction funding, but I'll explain that later. It also includes funding that is discretionary or competitive. The build grants, the rural surface transportation grants, these are competitive. It's not based on a formula. You have to apply. You have to put in a project and compete against the rest of the country for funding for certain of these grants. Most federal formula and grant funds are awarded annually, but some, like the Transportation Alternatives Program, is awarded every other year, biannually. So for those of you not certain, the Transportation Alternatives Program is about bike paths, sidewalks, pedestrian facilities, and that kind of thing. Active transportation, we often call it today. So examples of federal grants, the build grant, we're putting in some build grant applications this year, and I think the county also has one, am I right? Not
we
certain.
proposed that US 17
No.
with the county.
Well, Leon was talking about a build grant. I'm not sure whether it's this year or last year or next year or whatever, but anyway. Build grants are really, really, really great for rural counties and jurisdictions for one simple reason. The grant gives you 100% of the money. There's no match. You don't have to have any money in your back pocket to get a build grant. You just have to have a good application.
And this
Now-
is a build grant.
Yeah, they used to be called RAISE grants, and before that they were called Tiger grants. The build grant requires no local match. Don't have to have any if you're in a rural area. If you're in a designated urbanized area, then you have to have a 20% match. And those designations are made by the Census Bureau. So currently, all of FAMPO and GWRC is regarded as rural, except for the northern part of Stafford County, which is regarded as part of the Washington, D.C. urbanized area. Everything from northern Stafford to the border with Baltimore is classified by the Census Bureau as part of the Washington, D.C. urbanized area. They have to pay 20% match. The rest of the GWRC region, the George Washington Regional Commission region, does not. So you are in one of those counties where you don't need any local match. You might have to spend a little money on getting your application together. You might need to do an engineering drawing, you might need to do a cost estimate, and so on. But you don't need to put in any money as match. That's why this is a good grant for counties like Caroline. There is a cap per project of 25 million per grant per round. But the nice thing about this, as Becky will tell you, because she's been doing a lot of research on this for us, you can apply every year for the same project for more money. So you can apply for the NEPA and the pre-engineering 1 year. Then you can come back the next year and apply for money to buy the land, and come back the following year to get money to build the road. Each year they'll only give you up to 25 million, but you know, a couple of 25 millions, it starts to add up to a project that is substantial. And there you can see some of the eligible project examples. highways, bridges, road projects, public transportation projects, intermodal projects. You can replace or rehabilitate culverts, stormwater, all kinds of things. Surface transportation facilities on tribal land. And then there's a nice one. Any other surface transportation infrastructure that the secretary considers to be necessary. So, you know, every year they will publish a list of things you can apply for, which could include things that the secretary deems necessary. And planning projects. So we're applying for 2 planning grants under the BUILD program at our office. The one for the river crossing bridge between Stafford and the city of Fredericksburg, and the one for the widening of I-95 in Spotsylvania County. And we're fingers crossed that we'll get one of those, maybe both if we're really lucky. It's a competitive grant. The other one that's interesting is called the Rural Surface Transportation Grant. This one, you have to put in a 20% match. So this one, perhaps you might want to look at a smaller project where the match isn't so large, but you do have to put in a 20% match. There are 1 or 2 exceptions, but they're not exceptions that I think this county is eligible for. Again, highways, bridges, tunnels, freight project, a highway safety project, etc. State funding. Every state is different. Like most things in the United States, the states all run their own transportation funding program. They have their own taxation programs. And so they're all different. Virginia combines some federal and some state funding into one large program, which we call Smart Scale. Don't ask me what SMART stands for. It's an acronym, and I've forgotten what all the letters stand for. But anyway, that's our program, and it's intended to be based on objective data rather than politics. So you can beg your local politician or elected official as much as you like. They can't get you a project in Smart Scale. They get scored.
You can just influence the rules.
That you could do. I'd like to influence a couple of those rules. So the rules get updated annually, and sometimes they don't quite go the way we would like, and they don't help us. Richmond cleaned up last cycle. They got the bulk of the money. They put in good projects. They hired some clever people who redesigned their projects for them. And you know, the rules just work very well that cycle for them. We're busy preparing our projects as a regional organization this year, both for FAMPO and for the George Washington Commission. And you have some projects that are going in. Every county or city is allowed to submit 5 projects, up to 5 projects. And then, is it 5? I think it's 5.
5 for a pre-app.
5 for a pre-app, and then 4. So ultimately you can submit 4 per jurisdiction. And then FAMPO and GWRC can also put in 5, but it gets reduced by 1. So we get 4 slots and 4 slots for the region. And we typically try and put the bigger regional projects into our lists. And the jurisdictions apply for this slightly smaller projects on their local lists. So we try to cover everything. There are additional state funds that are set aside for some routine programs that are not part of Smart Scale. So some of the maintenance funds don't come out of Smart Scale. The big interstate freeways have some separate funding that doesn't have to come out of Smart Scale. And then there are some competitive grants. So the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, or VDOT, has certain grants to assist with things like planning and that kind of thing. Then they're available every so often you have to apply and so on and so on. Rural transportation funds are very limited and have not been increased for about 23 years. These are planning funds in which we help Caroline and King George to work on the planning of their transportation system. So sometimes we do high-level planning projects for a local area like Dahlgren. We did one in Dahlgren. We did one in Ladysmith. Various ones that we do. We don't do engineering drawings, though. I don't employ staff as engineers, so we aren't able to do engineering drawings, but we can do local planning studies. But those funds are limited, and it's getting worse because it's a small amount of money that hasn't been increased for 23 years. Do you know what the cumulative inflation rate over 23 years has been? So if an hour of staff time costs us X amount, and staff salaries go up a little every year to keep pace with inflation, we're actually losing ground. So for 23 years, we've been losing ground. The amount of hours we can spend working on those grants for you and for King George reduces every year because of inflation. We also, have to pay for things at the office. Then there are some dedicated state tax-based programs. So there's a thing called the commuter rail gas tax. And I talk about this often because it has implications for you here in Caroline. And some people don't like it when I talk about this. But, I just like to tell you all of the things that are going on. You can decide how to think about them from your own perspective. But the commuter rail gas tax was designed to raise additional taxes from an additional gas tax in the jurisdictions that have commuter rail. So the VRE goes from Spotsylvania to DC, so all of those jurisdictions along the route had a gas tax for that purpose. It was called the commuter rail gas tax when it was instituted. And then the Manassas branch, which is the Norfolk Southern line, those jurisdictions also had the commuter rail gas tax. And then the Virginia General Assembly decided to expand this gas tax to every jurisdiction in Virginia. So the majority of them have no commuter rail, but you pay the gas tax anyway, whether you like it or not, the whole state. In jurisdictions that don't have commuter rail, the only way you can get back some of that tax money is if you have, and don't kill me, if you have a regional transportation authority. It's the only way you can get the money back, unless one other way you can get it back is if you win a project in Smart Scale, some of that money that you get for your project comes out of that tax because of the leftover portion of it after everything else has been paid, they dump into Smart Scale, I believe. It's very hard to find the exact numbers on anything in the state legislation because when they did that, the second thing they did was that they didn't just extend it to every jurisdiction in the state, they also changed it from a retail gas tax so it appeared on your receipt. They transferred it to a wholesale gas tax. So it no longer appears on your receipt because it appears on the receipt of the wholesaler. And the third thing they did was that they linked it to inflation, CPI or CPIX, I don't know, which means it fluctuates, which means that you basically can never work out exactly what the percentage is. We spent a whole year trying to work it out, and it's very difficult, and they don't publish those details. I eventually called some jurisdictions that do have a regional transportation authority, and I said, you get money out of that gas tax. What percent is it? They said, I don't know, we just get a check. So they don't actually even know what the percent is anymore. Nobody knows what the percent is anymore. The I think the treasurer of the state is the only person who actually knows what the number is, and it fluctuates. And I don't even know whether it fluctuates monthly or annually or every 6 months, but it fluctuates with inflation. So the only way you can get, you're paying it when you go to the pump, you just don't know it because it doesn't appear on your receipt. It's on the wholesale price and it fluctuates. The only two ways you can get access to some of that money is it either if you have a regional transportation authority or if you win a bid for a smart scale project and you're successful and you get the funding for the smart scale project, and you have, right? Last cycle, some of your project applications were approved and you got funded. I forget which ones they were, but I recall Caroline and Spotsylvania got from our region. Stafford got 0 and Fredericksburg got 0 and I think King George got 0, but Caroline County got smart scale funding. That funding comes partly out of your gas tax, part of it comes out of other state taxes and so on. And then regional transportation authorities, we don't have one. There's one all sides of us. So Northern Virginia has one, Richmond has one, Hampton Roads has one, and I believe now the MPO area around Petersburg, I forget what it's called, they are now bringing legislation to the General Assembly because they want one. So they're going to get one as well.
Any idea how much Hampton Roads and Richmond get?
They told us 2 years ago at the Governor's Transportation Project, and I didn't memorize the number, but it's billions of dollars.
Pardon me?
Billions.
With a B?
With a B. Northern Virginia was quite proud of the fact that they have now handed out X billions of dollars, because what they do is that they divide it and a portion goes to the regional projects and a portion they hand back to the jurisdiction in which the money was raised. So it's a permanent funding stream for both the big regional projects, but for the counties and cities and towns in Northern Virginia. But it's billions. I don't know how many billions, I've forgotten the number, but they had it up on the screen at the Governor's Transportation Project.
So if the wholesale tax in Caroline County generated, say, $50 million a year,
Yeah.
and Caroline, and does it have to be all of TWRC? Could it be Caroline and King George?
Any combination of jurisdictions may apply to have a regional transportation authority. You have to have at least 2. One jurisdiction.
Okay, say Caroline, King George, and we have a regional transportation because the 2 counties have much in common. We have 301 in common.
I just want to say I'm not here to market regional
I
transportation
know.
authorities. I'm just
No
telling
one's
you
going to shoot you, Ian. Just calm down.
the facts. I've almost been shot before. So. Anyway, the point is,
Is there any interest in the Northern Neck? Any of the upper counties of the
I
Northern
don't
Neck?
believe so. King George actually decided at one point they wanted to secede from the Union, GWRC, and join the Northern Neck because they weren't interested in the transportation authority. So I don't believe that. We have one on the I-81 corridor, and the rest are on the I-95 corridor.
But going back
And
to,
Hampton Roads.
say, Caroline County contributes, our citizens contribute 50 million
Yeah.
per year. Roughly how much of that 50 million could we expect to get back?
Whatever the rules of the transportation authority say. So if it's complicated, but if you have a transportation authority, you can potentially get all of that particular gas tax back. But there's more than one gas tax, just remember that.
Right.
But the commuter rail gas tax in Richmond, I believe all goes into the transportation authority, 100% of it.
So conceivably, Caroline
I
County.
stand to be corrected though, because it's very murky. I want to just tell you, if you try and read the legislation, every bill refers to 4 other bills, except in this case, or except in the case of CF blah blah blah.
I understand.
So
I've
to
read legislation.
frickin' find it,
I know.
it's. But my understanding is that Richmond gets all of it. Northern Virginia doesn't because they fund VRE and they fund WMATA, the DC Metro. So they don't get all of their gas tax back. But they're an unusual animal. The one thing about these regional transportation authorities is that no two are the same. Every single one has a different financial structure.
And by the way, King George Board got a little bit of a reshuffle recently, and it might get reshuffled again.
I haven't followed your recent politics, but anyway, the point is they're all different. So it's often hard to answer questions because, you know, one of the RTAs has a 50-50 split where 50% they keep for regional project and 50% they give back to the jurisdictions. Another one is a 70-30 split. Another one keeps 100% in the center. So everyone's different. They're all unique and they all get approved by legislation. Local funding. So local and regional funding. So the county or city has got their general fund, which they're able to use for transportation or use for local match by the grants. You can have dedicated or earmarked municipal bonds, often via ballot measure. Spotsylvania has a bunch of those, and they use that money to be their local match when they apply for smart scale or when they apply for whatever else. The big RTAs use their RTA money as the local match. Spotsylvania has got municipal bonds and they use those for their local match. You can get location specific taxes or borrowing. So, okay, I've edited this slide. I think I've sent you an outdated slide for some weird reason. A TIF is a tax increment finance zone. A CDA is also location based. It's an association, and then you've got business improvement districts, and there are various other vehicles. So there are many more. There are 100 different vehicles of how you can have a location specific tax or a location specific loan. A TIF can get a loan against future taxes that you're going to get by upgrading the neighborhood. If you upgrade the neighborhood, more people will build houses and businesses there, and then those additional property taxes pay back the loan. So those are complicated, but all of those are location specific, and you know, they're usually used to upgrade an area. There's some big upgrade and it's real expensive, so then you create a vehicle like that to do it. The business improvement districts are often in big cities and they take over neighborhood that needs attention collectively. They all get together and say, all right, we'll all pay 1% more and put it in a dedicated business improvement district, and then we'll pay for, it's usually all over the world, for safety. So they put more security officers in the place, and for clean. So sweep the sidewalks, clean out the gutters, do a little bit of maintenance, signage, new signage, and up, you know, lift up the area. Some regions have the RTA, we talked about that. Now, this last one is complicated. Some regions have congestion mitigation and air quality funds, surface transportation block grant funds, carbon reduction funds, and highway improvement plan funds. Those only occur in urbanized areas. Urbanized areas.
Okay.
And the Census Bureau decides where the urbanized areas are. And each of those urbanized areas, if there are more than 50,000 people, have to have a metropolitan planning organization like FAMPO that I represent. They get allocated those kinds of funds on a formula basis. So it's not based on how good my project is. It's some money that you can allocate to a project. They're federal funds and they're allocated to a board like ours. I'll tell you about that a little further in a little while. So this is a very important thing to grasp. There is a funding cycle. And this is probably the most important thing I can tell you tonight. It's no good deciding, hey, we've got this project we need funded now. If you do that, you're too late. You're too late because you won't be ready to submit that project. You have to have done some work on the project to get it ready to apply, particularly with smart scale and transportation alternatives and even the federal programs. So the cycle is like that. It starts in the even years, so 2024. You start with pre-screening, readiness, eligibility. You check that you have a project that's going to be eligible. And then there's a whole submission process that goes on. And we're currently in that. We're in that cycle now. It goes, well, last year we were in the even year and we did all the preparation work.
Last year,
Last year was an odd year. That's,
March 1st.
of course, sorry, we're in 2026. I'm losing my mind. So in March this year, we're going to submit the pre-applications. By that stage, you have to have the work finished, basically, mostly finished on your project. And the pre-application, you say, this is our project. It's going to cost about X amount. It's on this street. It's going to be a sidewalk improvement or a widening of the road to 4 lanes or whatever. And then you carry on working on your application until July. The end of July or the 1st of August, you have to put in your application. Then you wait. And then VDOT and the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment scores that project. And they take August through to December to score those projects. It's a very complicated scoring process. Even we don't have all of the necessary facilities to be able to score those projects ourselves, even though we know what the metrics are. Because they use certain data sources, they use certain tools, and some of these are very expensive tools that we don't have. Anyway, they score the projects, and then in about January, February, they release the scores of each project the following year in the odd year, which is going to be in 2027. January, February, they will release the scores of all the projects that we're submitting this year. And then the CTB looks at the scores, has discussions around the projects and the system. They're told this year we can spend X amount of dollars, like 300 million or something. They then decide to fund the projects that have the high scores. Sometimes they can make a change to the list of projects by promoting a project that didn't score well. I think they can fund 3 projects that scored badly if they feel that those projects are important. But if they don't do that, the projects are funded from the highest score downwards until money runs out, basically. And then they have public meetings to tell everybody which projects they're planning to fund and get input from the public. And then in about the June, July, they adopt the funded set of projects, and your projects are then funded. And then they review the score, the methodology can be changed. So then those last few months of the cycle, they spend reviewing the methodology and they look at the outcomes and they go, well, those aren't the outcomes we wanted. Let's tinker with the methodology and change it. And then they tinker in those purple months, they change and tinker with the methodology. And then we start the cycle the following March all over again. So we're in January of the yellow cycle. We're waiting for the technical guide hasn't even been released. So we're waiting for the technical guide. I think there might be a draft out. Anyway, there's a technical guide that will guide how the projects will be scored, and you try and match your projects up to the scoring methodology so that you can do better. So sometimes you modify your project a little bit at the end to try and get a better score. The key thing here that I want you to take away is this 2-year cycle rolls on forever.
December 25, so.
December, they put out the draft technical guide. But this cycle runs on forever. So wherever you are in the cycle, you've got to get on the train for the next round so that you can get your projects funded. So when now in the yellow, if you don't have the study done to support your project, it's too late for this cycle. You've got to wait until the end of the odd years and submit it next time. But that 2-year cycle rolls on forever. When you get to the December purple, you move back to the January or the yellow and you start the whole thing over again. So what I'm trying to convey is you can't wake up in the July and quickly submit a project if you haven't got all the supporting documents done, haven't had a study to support it, don't have your cost estimate, don't have your engineering drawing, you won't get anywhere. The county has got somewhere because last cycle they were awarded some projects, but it takes some work. It doesn't magically happen. It's not like doing a school assignment and handing it in. There's a lot of people involved in preparing that project for this submission to SmartScale, and this is the biggest Virginia funding system to get funding for your projects. Transportation alternatives is for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. This is your sidewalks, your bike path, your whatever. It's a lot less money, but it also follows this 2-year cycle. So there's the current cycle. We made jurisdictions made their submissions last year, and the applications are now in screening and scoring. And we heard, actually, I got a sneak preview of the scores of all the projects today. We have in this region 7 projects that are in for screening and scoring, and it looks like Stafford County has got some really high scoring projects. We don't know if they're going to be funded though, because there is a complicated review process. The Commonwealth Transportation Board member for the area can influence which projects get picked. So it's not only based on the score. There is some influence from the Commonwealth Transportation Board and some other processes. So we won't know which projects are funded yet, although I do know the scores of the projects. I don't know if those are the ones that are going to get picked for funding. We'll find out in the next few months. But again, it's a 2-year cycle. If you want a sidewalk funded, you have to have it designed, costed, and submitted in the right point in the cycle if you want to get it funded. And Caroline does apply as well for projects like this. But just remember, you got to be working 2 years ahead so that you get your sidewalk or your bike path or your whatever else in there. You can't wake up like now. They're scoring this round of projects. You can't submit anything now for a whole year. It's too late. But you can prepare your project this year for the next cycle. There's always something you can do about your projects. It's just there might be a year and a half before you find out if it's funded. So if you're not preparing projects at the right time, in the correct month of the 2-year cycle, you're not going to have projects ready to submit. If you want more funding, you've got to work the system. You've got to prepare projects to receive funding. What do I mean by prepare? You usually have to have a planning study for a SmartScale project. The transportation alternatives applications have to be listed in a plan, like the county comprehensive plan or the rural long-range transportation plan. So you got to get the project designed, costed, and in your plans. If it's a transportation alternatives, you don't always require a big study for TAP applications. But if you don't meet those conditions, you're going to have to wait 2 years to try again on both SmartScale and TAP applications. there are sometimes additional requirements. All projects will require a sketch or an engineering drawing of some sort. All projects will require a formal cost estimate using an approved process. And then there are some additional documents you may need. You're going to need a letter of support or a resolution from your board. And many federal grants require a local 20% match. That's why I told you about the build grant, because it doesn't require the match. So there are some that don't. And VDOT coordination is usually required, but you need to talk to VDOT about a roadway project if you want to do it. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier. There are the 4 funding streams that come to FAMPO. And if you look at that map on the right, those blue areas are what the Census Bureau has decided in our area are the urbanized areas. If you're in an urbanized area, you have to be part of a metropolitan planning organization like FAMPO. You don't have a choice. So if that blue crosses that line, you need to know this because it might change it. That is the Caroline County border with Spotsylvania. If that urbanized area crosses into your county, you automatically by law have to join FAMPO. There's no exception. But no one can force anyone to build anything in that area next to the blue. That's up to county zoning. That's up to a developer applying to build houses there or whatever it is. But if that does happen, you will automatically have to join FAMPO. If you will have to join FAMPO, you may apply for these kinds of funding, which don't require a match from us, and which we allocate every 2 years to projects in our jurisdictions. Currently, you are not eligible for this funding because you're not part of what the Census Bureau considers an urbanized area. Just telling you this doesn't affect you right now, but it may affect you if the urbanized area grows. And only the Census Bureau can make that determination. So we have nothing to do with it. Under certain conditions, you might be able to join FAMPO without that, but generally, the same's going to happen here with, I think this is actually Fauquier, not Culpeper, out here, where it's right up to the boundary. And if it crosses that boundary, that county will have to join FAMPO. Orange County, there's still some distance, so we'll have to wait and see what develops out on Route 3. But if the development goes down, there is development right on the border here in Orange County, but in Spotsylvania, it hasn't gone out far enough yet. So there's some background for you to know that there are other funding sources that you may in the future be able to tap into. And again, there's no match for those funding sources required from the local jurisdiction. How to fund studies and documents. So what I've been saying is get your project ready for funding. What does that mean? If it's smart scale, you need a study that recommends that solution. How do you get a study? Some studies are funded by the state. So we have pipeline studies and we have STAR studies. Currently in Caroline County, there is a STAR study on the go. It's around about the location is around about the intersection of I-95 and what is Ladysmith Road? Yeah. So we have a study on the go there. And that study is going to make some recommendations, and those recommendations could become projects to submit to Smart Scale and to get funding. And, you know, it could be $100 million project. Depends on what is recommended. Also, the jurisdiction could fund a study. So the county, by any one of those forms of funding, could fund a study to do something which is not in a state-funded study. So if the state has not decided to fund a study in some part of Caroline County that you think is important and the state doesn't think is important, you can fund your own study through various means. For smaller projects not requiring a full study like the transportation alternative projects, our staff can do a limited high-level planning study, and we've done those, like the one in Ladysmith and the one in Carmel Church, and previously we had one in
Bowling Green.
Bowling Green, and that led to some projects, one of which was funded. I know there's been some changes to that project where the county decided later that aspects of it they didn't like, and it's been reworked, and I don't know where it is now, but anyway, we've done some of that work. We don't do engineering drawings and cost estimates at GWRC. So that's something which either we have to ask VDOT to do, or you have to hire a consultant to do, or whatever. And then the county may employ a consultant to do a study, as you like. So the keys to success: fit into the timeline of the federal government or the state for your funding applications, and watch those timelines. The federal ones are mostly annual. Every year, there's a certain month where you can submit applications. The state, the big ones are usually 2-year cycle. So again, fit in with the timeline. Always have 1 or 2 projects in the pipeline that you're working on, because then the next cycle you've got something ready that you can apply for to get that funding. Invest resources where necessary. I know that the smaller rural jurisdictions don't have a lot of money to spend, but sometimes you just got to get somebody to do a proper drawing, right? Or a cost estimate. You just have to, because otherwise the project isn't ready. Prepare the documents. Sometimes you've just got to amend the rural long-range plan or amend your comprehensive plan to include that project, etc. Inform VDOT in advance that you're going to submit this project, because people like David and his colleagues don't want to hear the last minute that you suddenly got the project and they need help with it. They have limited resources. They can't just drop everything in. So if you're planning on submitting a project, tell them. They'll help out where they can, but their resources are limited. And keep doing this for every cycle. Keep on chipping away at that cycle. Don't wait until the deadlines are published to start work on your project. It's too late by then. Don't shy away from spending just a little bit to get your project into shape. Sometimes you need to spend a little bit to get the project submission ready. Don't miss an opportunity to work with VDOT on a study like Pipeline or STAR study. You generally don't. You're usually there and usually participate. But don't miss those opportunities. They're valuable because VDOT is paying for the study for you. You're not even paying for the study. They're preparing the documents for your actual submission to SmartScale, and it saves you all that money. And then inform VDOT early that you have an idea or a project that you want to submit, so that they can plan it in their work program over the next year. Some districts in the state do not give any support to their local folks in terms of designing a project, doing a study, preparing because they just don't have the VDOT resources to help. Our region will help a little, but you gotta, play your part. That was a lot, I know, but I try to give you an overview of what's going on in the world of funding in Virginia and in the federal government. Happy to take questions. I didn't bore you completely, Mr. Chair.
Nope, not at all.
But that kind of gives you a feel for the whole thing.
What's the prospect for change in the near future?
Change of what?
What you just presented.
Wow. Well,
A case in point, in the state of Virginia, I think our new transportation secretary is very bullish on rail.
So we're in I mean, I have to make slightly political comments, but it's not about politics, it's about the transportation process, right? So the federal government has an aversion to transit at the moment because of the administration. The state leans the other way, and so they have a big interest in transit. So that means that the federal funding process and the state funding process are going in different directions, will go in different directions in the next 3 years. Remember, the current administration will be in the majority in the federal government, and they will be approving the 5-year Transportation Reauthorization Act, right? That's the big money that covers the whole country. And they have certain, I attended a presentation in DC by a Republican congressman from North Carolina, and he's sitting on the committee in Congress that is drawing up that new bill. And I think he said highway and bridge 1,000,000 times in his presentation, and he only mentioned transit once in a footnote towards the end of his presentation. So you can just read the tone, right? And I think that's going to be reflected in the new bill. I'm not saying it will, but it sounds like it.
When you say transit, what's your definition?
All the modes of transit.
What?
All the modes of transit, buses, rail, everything. So it includes Amtrak, for example. So passenger rail I'm talking about now, not freight
So
rail.
you're saying that this guy favors surface transportation, highways and bridges
Roads and automobiles and trucks.
versus Amtrak, rail,
Yes,
but Virginia's going to go the other way.
yes.
Okay, so between the two of them, we might get enough for our roads
There you go.
and some for the rail.
There you go. So there's the two levels of government are going in opposite directions right now. And that's not always a bad thing, and unless they clash, right? It will mean that there will not be, I don't believe, lots of good new funding for Amtrak from the federal government because they're not going to up that. But Virginia provides additional funding for Amtrak, and Amtrak supplies, I think, 4 additional trains per day that are funded by Virginia, not by the federal government. We pay extra. But what happens if the federal government reduces Amtrak's subsidy, for example? I don't know. Yeah, so we'll have to see because the new administration of Virginia is very new. So we have to see what their budget looks like. The governor said that is she officially sworn in yet?
Not yet.
No.
So she's the governor-elect. I
Right.
didn't want to get my terms wrong. The
Right.
governor-elect said something the other day about not increasing taxes and driving down the cost of living. Now, if you're going to drive down the cost of living and not increase taxes, that says to me that I'm not so sure there's going to be a lot of money, additional money for transportation, because where's it going to come from? So are they going to switch funding that goes to roadways to transit? If you said that they're very committed to transit, well, from what funding source is my question. It's not immediately obvious. So we have to wait and see until they've got a draft budget from the outgoing governor, which I think the new crowd can amend before it's approved. So let's see what they do. But we live in interesting times. One of our funding sources, we haven't been paid in 6 months. We got our first approval for the funding yesterday. So I hope by next Tuesday, Wednesday, we get back pay for the 6 months they haven't paid it. The federal government supplies the money to Virginia, and then Virginia supplies it to us. And there was a whole delay. The new administration said, stop everything, we're going to review all grants. And we rely on that money to pay salaries and keep the lights on. So we've not been paid by one of our funding sources since June. So we're carrying a lot of money. So this is the kind of thing that happens. So I don't know. I'm talking too much, but we live in times where So two levels of government are going in opposite directions in theory, but let's see the actual budgets. The current federal budget runs out this month again. When I was in politics, we approved an annual budget every year by June, without fail. Kicking and screaming and shouting, but we approved it every year by June. There was no such thing as shutting the government down. I've never had that in my whole lifetime in South Africa. We never shut the government down because we failed to approve the budget. So for me, that's been a learning curve watching it happen, right? It's like send people home because we're still fiddling with the budget. It's weird to me.
Okay, any other questions?
You're not on,
Yes.
you didn't mention revenue sharing. I think it
Yes.
runs with transportation alternatives. So if you had any, that revenue sharing is a 50% match
Absolutely.
required.
You're absolutely right. I should have included that. And it's probably because I don't have a role in revenue sharing at all. And so I forget about it. I tend to forget about it. But yes, it's a bidding process, right?
Well,
Every year you got to submit the projects that you want. And the state will meet you 50-50 on the cost of the project. So jurisdictions have got a really passionate project and they can't get it funded any other way. They can,
and I think there are some limits as to how much,
yeah.
where smart scale you could ask for whatever you want.
Yeah, there are limits and there's an annual allocation. So only up to that amount of money is available. But for example, I know Spotsylvania, every cycle they do revenue sharing projects where they put up 50% of the money and the state puts up the other 50% of the money to widen a road or do you do resurfacing with that money or no?
I think they do for the
Yeah.
cities.
So the
Okay.
revenue sharing is another method. I guess also the other reason I didn't raise it is because you got to come up with so much local match that you're not going to do massive projects in Caroline with revenue sharing, I think,
Yeah,
because it's the matches.
I've seen it be successful in rural areas. An example would be, like you talked about, the local funding for a tax district. In Westmoreland, they have a sanitary district. They charge everybody a transportation fee within the sanitary district. It's really just two large neighborhoods that have some gravel roads, and they use the revenue they generate through the transportation fee in the sanitary district to apply for revenue sharing to bring roads into the system. So it's like a rural rustic program through the revenue sharing.
That's a very innovative way of getting transportation funding.
That's cool.
So, our example might be if Lake Caroline had private roads and they wanted to make those public VDOT roads, they could charge the people in Lake Caroline a fee per lot or whatever, and then they could apply for revenue sharing, double it, and eat the elephant one bite at a time, one road at a time. The only other thing I would mention is transportation alternatives. VDOT has a grant program called Ready, Set, Go that you can apply for, and they accept applications on a rolling basis continually to help you get an application ready to go in time for transportation alternatives.
That is important because there again, it helps you with the preparation costs. So that is an important point.
So those are two things I have to add.
Yeah.
And transportation alternatives, 20% match.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Well, Ian, I want to thank you so very much for the wealth
Thanks
of
for having me.
information that you shared with us.
Very
Yeah,
good.
very good information. Thank you. Yes.
And how would we get the slide deck?
You're
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, all right. Is there any new business staff?
We do
Go
need
ahead.
to approve the minutes.
We don't have the minutes. Do we have the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Send them on an email.
Those on at the last minute on the email. I didn't have them on the agenda, but I was able to get them on there, so if y'all wanna do them, if not. then we'll-
I didn't see it. My apologies.
Yeah.
You all,
Yeah,
did you see any changes or modifications?
I did not, no. So at this time, I'll move that we approve the minutes for the October 1st, 2025 meeting as well as the December 3rd, 2025 minute, or 2025 meeting as distributed.
I'll be happy to second.
Okay, approved by, Mrs. Street and second by Becky, and, yep, all those in favor? Any nays? Ayes have it, it's been approved as written. Thank you so much, Lisa, for all your hard work, in getting the stuff out,
Yeah,
as
great job.
well as,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'd like to see you out here a little more. We don't want Leon sick, but we'd like to see you out here a little more. Okay. So if there's no more new business, I'll take a motion to,
Motion to adjourn.
okay, so move.
Second.
Properly moved in second, we'll see y'all next month. First
Hey,
Wednesday
Good meeting.
Thanks for having
in
me.
February.
Thank you.
Have a safe drive home.
I will, yes.